Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Book Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I just want to record a short podcast on the growing crisis in the Republika Srpska, which of course is the uh, Serb dominated entity that comprises the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. As you know, the president of the Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, has run afoul of the law, supposedly, of Bosnia and Herzegovina because he has refused to abide by the rulings of the Office of the High Representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina and to abide by the rulings of the Constitutional Court. Now, the Office of the High Representative is a foreign appointed entity, usually an Austrian or a German. And the current occupant of that office is a German, Christian Schmidt. And essentially, he's an unelected figure, and he runs Bosnia and Herzegovina as a dictator would. He has the powers to overturn legislation. He has the power to fire elected leaders, including presidents, and he can just simply overrule any decisions made by democratically elected bodies, all, of course, in the name of democracy. And of course, he enjoys the aura that comes from being the figure who's implementing the decisions of the EU and NATO and the rest. So that's who really runs Bosnia and Herzegovina, and an elected leader, as Milorad Dodik is, he has to follow the dictates of the Office of the High Representative. And similarly, the Constitutional Court really isn't in any meaningful way a proper constitutional court. It has nine representatives on that court. Two from representing the Serbs, two representing the Muslims, and two representing the Croats, and then three who are entirely foreign. They're appointed by the European Court of Human Rights. So they're three judges who have no connection whatever to Bosnia and Herzegovina. And of course, they're there to adopt the decisions made by the EU, Brussels, NATO, and so on. Now, what had happened, and this is what's very, very important to keep in mind, because the media coverage of Bosnia and Herzegovina is so skewed and so out of touch with the reality that one always has to keep in mind exactly what took place in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So as you know, there was a war during the early 1990s, a war which, as I've outlined in my book, Bombs for Peace, NATO's humanitarian war in Yugoslavia. It's a war that was provoked by the Western powers who insisted on breaking up Yugoslavia along the borders of the existing republics, even though those republics in no way reflected any kind of national groups. And so it was inevitable that war would break out. Now, the final settlement of that war took place through the Dayton peace accords that was negotiated in Dayton, Ohio, in November and December of 1995, and then it was finally signed in January 1996. What Dayton accomplished was a de facto partition of Bosnia and Herzegovina. There was a Muslim Croat federation and a Serb republic. And they were tied together in a very loose confederal framework. the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina was preserved. There was a unitary state was preserved, which is what the West was so absolutely determined to ensure, even as they were so determined to break up Yugoslavia. So that was this bizarre policy, which is that Yugoslavia must go, Yugoslavia must destroy. It doesn't represent the peoples of Yugoslavia. However, Bosnia and Herzegovina must be preserved. That republic must be preserved, even though it consists of three very different nations and who don't really particularly want to be members of this state. But anyway, but that was the important thing that the West insisted on, that Bosnia be preserved, and that Dayton did. But it could only be preserved if this confederation was very, very loose. So essentially, the Republika Srpska would run its own affairs, and then the federation would also run its affairs. Now, as always happens, and we know this from long, painful record, that the moment a deal is signed, the West sets about dismantling the deal. Just within minutes. Just with the ink isn't even dry on the paper, but the West is already setting out to dismantle the agreement. So, having created this framework in Bosnia and Herzegovina of these two loosely united entities, the West decided, well, you know what? We will create very much a centralized state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, even though the people in Bosnia didn't want it. In fact, they fought a war precisely in order not to have a centralized unitary state. We would just go ahead, ignore Dayton, and begin the centralization process. And they did that through this so-called Peace Implementation Council, and which met in Bonn in 1997. And at this meeting in Bonn in 1997, they created what came to be known as the Bonn Powers. And what the Bonn Powers accomplished was to give huge authority to the Office of the High Representative. The Office of the High Representative under Dayton was only supposed to help implement the agreement, and was supposed to be a temporary position until everything was sorted out. The war had come to an end, and all the various odds and ends stemming from the war were resolved. But instead, through this Peace Implementation Council and through the Bonn Powers, the office of the High Representative was made a permanent thing. Not just that it was a permanent thing, but essentially this internationally appointed figure was effectively the ruler of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It was never envisaged under Dayton. And he had all powers bestowed upon him. He could pretty much do whatever he liked if he thought that this was in any way some decision, or some politician was in any way damaging the unity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it didn't matter what people wanted, whether they wanted unity or didn't want the unity, whether they wanted a legislation or didn't want legislation. If the Office of the High Representative, the effective dictator of Bosnia and Herzegovina, decided that such and such a political figure or such and such a piece of legislation was detrimental to the unity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, he would just simply cancel it. He would fire politicians. He would cancel legislation. This was done, again, undemocratically, against the spirit of Dayton in 1995 by this Peace Implementation Council. And of course, who were members of the Peace Implementation Council? Well, naturally, the NATO powers. Now, Russia was there, but of course, Russia was always in a minority, and therefore its voice really didn't count for anything very much. So we got to the point now where the Republika Srpska has really got very tired of having its decisions continually overturned by the Office of the High Representative, and made a decision saying that we will not recognize the decisions of this unelected figure, who's not even a Serb, a Croat, or a Muslim. He's just a German, and who serves not the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but the powers of the West. So they got fed up with it, and of course, punishment for doing that is very swift. And Milorad Dodik was put on trial and sentenced to prison, and essentially banned from holding office. Now, that was the decision of the trial court, and that decision has now been upheld by the appellate court. So the process of removing him from office has now begun. And well, there are real questions, which is, well, what are the Western powers going to do about it? Because, of course, Bosnia and Herzegovina is a very small country. And NATO, of course, remembers its glory days of the 1990s, when it was able to pummel the Serbs of Bosnia and then the Serbs of Serbia to its heart's content without any adverse consequences at all. The Serbs are obviously, very, very weak, had very limited ability to fight back against NATO. Russia was, had gone AWOL during the 1990s, and NATO may well decide that this would be a good opportunity to intervene once again, 30 years on, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and arrest Milorad Dodik and deliver him to jail in Sarajevo, which of course is in the Muslim Croat half of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that's a very real possibility. And so this crisis is developing quite intensely. So let me just show you a few stories that have appeared on this. So here, first of all, is Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, which says the court confirms prison sentence for Bosnian Serb leader Dodik. And it says that the appellate court has confirmed a prison sentence for Bosnian Serb President Milorad Dodik for disregarding the decisions of an international peace envoy. So that's always the way it's presented. It's never explained in none of the stories. And that's why it's very important to write. In not one of the stories is it pointed out that these powers accumulated by the international peace envoy were not envisaged by Dayton. That was not the agreement that was signed to by the leaders of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia. Of course, it was signed by Slobodan Milosevic. And it says Dodik was appealing a sentence handed to him in February for defying the constitutional court as well as the peace envoy. And then it included, now again, as I said about the Constitutional Court, where you have three foreign judges, and then the Serbs are essentially in a minority. They only get two judges on that court. There are 9 judges, 2 of them are Serbs, and then basically the Muslim Croat Federation, they get 4 because the Croats get 2, the Muslims get 2. That's 4. 4 plus 3 from the foreign, and the Serbs are in a permanent minority on the Constitutional Court. And then it goes on. The European Union, which Serbia seeks to join, said the ruling must be respected. Well, of course, that's what they'd say. The EU calls on all parties to acknowledge the independence and impartiality of the court and to respect and uphold its verdict. Why would they claim that has independence and impartiality. I mean, what's the basis of that claim other than that? Well, that's what the Office of the High Representative claims, but there's no independence and the impartiality here. The Muslims in particular um, are very much in favor of a unitary state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they want the dissolution of the Republika Srpska. They dominate the institutions of the Muslim Croat Federation, and they dominate the judicial institutions. So there's no independence and impartiality there. The furor around Dodik has ignited a major political crisis in the EU membership hopeful. This is very strange. I mean, they say this is Serbia. That's the way they slip. This article slips into Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Republika Srpska, doesn't have any aspirations for EU membership. But they kind of elide the difference between the Republika Srpska and Serbia proper. So they said, oh, Serbia seeks to join. And then by saying that, they suggest that somehow the Republika Srpska also wants to join, which is not true. And then it says, while Republika Srpska can pass laws on internal matters, state-level laws and institutions remain supreme according to the Constitution. That isn't true. That isn't what Dayton envisaged. The whole point, as I said, and that's very important to keep in mind, the whole point of Dayton was that there would be almost no federal institutions, that there were these two entities would be joined together in a very loose confederation, and therefore they'd be able to live together. Because if you start with these federal institutions, then there's a good chance that the war would commence. And then says the Office of the High Representative oversees the implementation of the civilian aspects of Dayton. Dodik, who is currently under US and UK sanctions for actions that Western governments say are aimed at the secession of Republika Srpska from Bosnia, has refused to implement several orders from the Office of High Representative. So this is what I mean by the way these things are framed. They say, oh, he's seeking to secede. Dodik has said, that it may happen if you go against the agreement that was signed on Dayton. If you try to centralize the institutions of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was not agreed to at Dayton, then there might be the Republika Srpska might secede. But that's never presented in the media. Oh, they just want to secede, which in itself is also not exactly such a horrific, terrible, monstrous act, since, I have to say this again and again, the West rushed to recognize the secessions of the individual republics of Yugoslavia, Russia, Croatia, Slovenia, Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then, of course, rushed to recognize, the entity of Kosovo, which wasn't even a republic, was just a province of Serbia, and recognize that. So the way the West goes around in media, go around lifting their skirts in horror at the idea of the secession of Republika Srpska just shows how much bad faith informs Western media coverage of the Balkans. And then here, the process of removing Dodik from the presidency has already begun. So this is from the Southeast Europe News. Bosnia's election commission revokes Dodik's presidential mandate. The decision will only become final after the appeal deadline, which can take a month or two. If the decision is confirmed by the Court of Appeals, early elections will be held within 90 days. And then Dodik has said that he will not step down as president of the Serb Republic and will not allow early elections in several public addresses after the Appellate Council of Bosnia's top court confirmed a first instance verdict against Dodik and sentenced him to 1 year in prison and 6 years off political duty. And then here's Balkan Insight, which is run by this Soros EU-funded Balkan investigative reporting network. And here says Bosnian Serb leaders' presidential mandate revoked following verdict. The Central Election Commission revokes Milorad Dodik's mandate as a Republika Srpska entity president after confirmation of his prison sentence and ban on holding presidential office. And then Bosnia's top election regulator, the Central Election Commission, revoked Dodik's presidential mandate on Wednesday following his 1 year prison sentence and 6 year ban on holding the office of the president of Republika Srpska. Dodik was convicted of not complying with the decisions of Bosnia's international peace overseer. See, not complying, you go to prison if you don't comply with the decisions of an unelected bureaucrat. You go to prison. It's in the name of, all in the name of democracy. And then Dodik's defense has up to 2 days to appeal the decision before the appellate division of the Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which handles electoral complaint. Once the appeals process is exhausted, the decision will become final. And then the Central Election Commission will then issue a decision on calling early elections. Now, Dodik then sent out these tweets today saying, "What if I refuse?" And then another tweet says, "Another crap from Sarajevo," the last one. And then here's another tweet from Dodik today. "As I swore, I swear that I will conscientiously and responsibly perform my duties, protect state secrets, defend and represent the interests of the people and citizens of the Republic of Srpska, and honorably uphold the Constitution and laws of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Republic of Srpska." There's no CIK, there's no constitutional, Central Election Commission there. And then here, also from Balkan Insight, kind of realizing, I mean, this is the point that what Dodik is doing. He says you cannot whatever you do, hold elections. That's what they're trying to do. After the Bosnian state court's verdict banning him from holding office and sentencing him to 1 year in prison was confirmed, Milorad Dodik, president of Bosnia's of Republika Srpska, vowed not to quit and to thwart any attempt to hold elections to replace him. "I call on my associates to reject any possibility of holding early presidential elections and to engage the Republika Srpska police and everyone else not to allow any polling station to be set up." Because you saw earlier that that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get him out. They say he's no longer president. We need to hold elections. And that's why he's saying, there are to be no elections. Don't play along with this. So that's why I call on my associates to reject any possibility of holding early presidential elections, because that, of course, legitimizes the decision of removing him from office. And then, according to the election law of Bosnia and Herzegovina, an elected official's mandate terminates on the day a court verdict becomes final if he or she is sentenced to 6 months or more in prison, and so on. And now I just want to show you, we don't want to go into this in any great detail, but just what the important issues were in Dayton. So this was the Dayton Agreement. This was the one in 1995, and this was in Annex 10, which outlined the powers of the Office of the High Representative. So this is the agreement on the civilian implementation. And then it says the High Representative, the parties agree, the implementation of the civilian aspects will entail a wide range of activities, including continuation of humanitarian aid effort for as long as necessary, rehabilitation of infrastructure and economic reconstruction, the establishment of political and constitutional institutions, promotion and respect for human rights, return of displaced persons, and the holding of free and fair elections. So that's what he's supposed to do. He just says, yeah, so that's fairly innocuous. You think, okay, where does it say that you have the right to overturn legislation? Where does it say you can fire elected leaders, elected representatives? Where did it outline that at Dayton? And then here too, in view of the complexities facing them, the parties request the designation of high representatives to be appointed consistent with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions to facilitate the parties' own efforts and to mobilize, as appropriate, coordinate the activities of the organizations, agencies involved in the civilian aspects of the peace settlement. Okay, and then it goes on, the High Representative shall monitor implementation of the peace settlement, maintain close contact with the parties to promote their full compliance with all civilian aspects of the peace settlement, coordinate the activities of civilian organizations to ensure the efficient implementation, blah, blah. The High Representative shall respect their autonomy within their spheres of operation while it's necessary, and so on. And then the civilian organizations, the agencies are requested to assist the High Representative in the execution of his or her responsibilities by providing and so on. And then, and again, facilitate as the High Representative judges necessary the resolution of any difficulties arising in connection with civilian implementation, so on, so on, so on. You could say it's fairly anodyne. It's exactly what a facilitator, that's a position to facilitate, make sure that the functioning institutions are cooperating, and then after 1 year, as it was envisaged, he would just simply disappear. The office would no longer be needed. That was 1995, so that's 30 years on. He's still there. And then it says, Article 5, this is of this Annex 10, it says, the High Representative is the final authority in theater regarding the interpretation of this agreement. This was the poison chalice by saying, well, he has the final authority in theater regarding interpretation of this agreement on the civilian implementation of the peace settlement. However, it only says the interpretation. He will has the final authority on how to interpret the agreement. But he wasn't granted any executive powers. That's the point. He wasn't granted the powers to legislate, and he wasn't granted the powers to govern. You can say he's there as supposedly as an implementer, as a coordinator. And then, but this was what? This was here, the 1997, the Peace Implementation Council, the PIC. They met, and as I say, this always happens. This is what the West does, absolutely meticulously. The moment they are forced to sign an agreement that they don't like, they set about vitiating it to make sure that it's the agreement comes to mean something very different from what it meant at the moment that the parties signed on to it. And that's what the Peace Implementation Council did. That's why they had that meeting in Bonn, and that's when they just went ahead, undemocratically, of course, granted the Bonn powers to the Office of High Representative, which is what the Milorad Dodik and the National Assembly of the Republika Srpska object to. They said, we never signed on to this. This wasn't what was in Dayton. Anyway, and then here it says, the Council welcomes the High Representative's intention to use his final authority in theater regarding interpretation of the agreement on the civilian implementation of the peace settlement, in order to facilitate the resolution of difficulties by making binding decision as he judges necessary on the following issues. And so timing, location, chairmanship of meetings of common institutions, interim measures to take effect when the parties are unable to reach agreement, and so on. And then C, other measures to ensure implementation of the peace agreement throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina and its entities, as well as the smooth running of the common institutions. Such measures may include actions against persons holding public office. Oh, where did it say that in Dayton? That he can take actions against persons holding public office or officials who are absent from meetings without cause, or who are found by the High Representative to be in violation of legal commitments made under the peace agreement. So he can take actions against whomever he chooses. He can overturn the decisions of democratically elected bodies. And there it was, slipped right in there in that meeting in Bonn, the Peace Implementation Council, and declared 1998. No one even noticed at the time. Essentially, hey, all powers have been, ceded to a dictator appointed by the Western powers. And he can do what he likes. Such measures may include actions against persons holding public office or officials who are absent from meetings without good cause, or who are found by the High Representative to be in violation of legal commitments made under the peace agreement or the terms for its implementation. And this, in fact, happened all the time. In fact, almost immediately after this meeting in Bonn, the High Representative at the time, Carlos Westendorp, dismissed from office the elected president of the Republika Srpska, a guy by the name of Nikola Poplasen. Ironically enough, he replaced Poplasen with Milorad Dodik. So this was 1998, and Dodik at the time was seen to be, a reliable pro-Western stooge. So they got rid of Poplasen, because he was seen to be a follower of Karadzic or whatever, and so they inserted Dodik. Now Dodik is the hated figure, but all of the figures who occupied that office of the High Representative, like Paddy Ashdown, the permanently inebriated failed British politician, or Wolfgang Petritsch. I mean, these awful non-entities who are always filling in these international positions. And they spent, on a regular basis, they fired elected officials, they scrapped legislation they didn't like, or simply adopted legislation that they wanted. They just simply declared. Christian Schmidt's predecessor just said, added to the criminal code, just of his own back. He just added to the criminal code that, genocide denial or a celebration of war criminals will be a criminal act, punished by imprisonment. He just did it, off his own back. He's the, he didn't have to wait for legislators to adopt such laws. He just made that decision, added it to the criminal code. That was the guy who preceded Christian Schmidt. So this is the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As I said, it's quite possible that things could get very nasty in the near future if NATO decides to intervene and to implement the arrest warrant against Dodik. I think they would like to do it. They're obviously they have to worry about how the Serbs would react and what they would do, but there aren't really that many of the Serbs, and some NATO may well think that they should be able to pull this off without too much aggravation, just as they did in the 1990s. Russia's got its hands full in Ukraine, unlikely to intervene, so that's a possibility. But what's happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina is, of course, of a piece with this quite frightening rampage against democratic bodies going on in the European continent. So we've seen what happened to Marine Le Pen. She's, as things stand, she's banned from running for the the presidency of France in 2027. We see moves to outlaw the Alternative für Deutschland party in Germany. We saw the cancellation of presidential elections in Romania and the prevention of candidates that were out of favor with Brussels, prevention of them running for office. And then we see what's happening in Moldova, where there's elections taking place in September. I'm going to do a separate video on that shortly. So this is now very much a pattern in Europe that political leaders that Brussels or Washington don't like are simply arrested or just banned from running for office. It's as simple as that. You just cancel democracy, and of course, it's all done in the name of democracy and values, which is what the West really stands for, values. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me, and remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.